Marcus deserves the business, Rebecca, my father declared from his hospital bed, not even glancing in my direction as he held my brother's hand. He's always had the vision, the natural leadership ability. You're better with details. I stood there, 10 years of my life dedicated to saving our family's company, watching as they signed over everything to my brother. What none of us knew was that a sealed envelope in their lawyer's office would soon expose a truth that would shatter our family's carefully constructed illusion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany conference table in Thompson & Associates' law office reflected the grim faces of our family gathering. I sat at the far end, my fingers tracing the wood grain pattern, trying to steady my breathing as our family attorney, Mr. Thompson, adjusted his reading glasses. My brother Marcus lounged confidently in the leather chair across from me, already wearing the expression of someone who knew exactly what was coming. As we discussed in our previous meetings, Mr. Thompson began, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Your parents have made their final decisions regarding the distribution of assets, including Bradford Industries. I watched my mother reach over to squeeze Marcus's hand, her diamond bracelet catching the afternoon light filtering through the conference room windows. Neither of my parents looked at me. They hadn't really looked at me in years, not since I'd chosen to work my way up through our family business, rather than pursuing the flashy MBA program they'd insisted would make me worthy of leadership. The entirety of Bradford Industries, including all subsidiaries, real estate holdings, and associated assets, will be transferred to Marcus Bradford upon our passing, my father announced, his voice strong despite his recent health challenges. Rebecca will receive the summer house in Maine and a trust fund equivalent to 5% of the company's current valuation. 5%. After 10 years of 60-hour weeks, of saving the company from bankruptcy not once but twice, of implementing systems that tripled our profit margins, I was worth 5% to them. The summer house, a property I'd never even visited because I was always too busy keeping their business afloat, was meant to be my consolation prize. Additionally, my mother chimed in, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness that had fooled so many business associates over the years. We've decided that Marcus should take over as CEO immediately. Your father's health isn't what it used to be, and Marcus has shown such promise with his startup ventures. Startup ventures. That was their euphemism for the 3 failed businesses they'd funded for Marcus over the past 5 years, each one hemorrhaging money, until I quietly intervened to minimize the damage to our family's reputation and finances. But those interventions happened behind the scenes, in late-night meetings and weekend crisis management sessions that my parents never knew about, or chose not to acknowledge. I understand, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Is there anything else I should know about the arrangements? Mr. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at my parents before continuing. There is one more item. A sealed letter, to be opened only upon certain circumstances. What circumstances? Marcus asked, suddenly interested. The letter is to remain sealed unless questions arise about the company's financial history or operational decisions made in the past decade, Mr. Thompson explained carefully. It's a safeguard your parents insisted upon. My father waved his hand dismissively. Just a formality. Marcus, son, we should discuss the transition timeline. Rebecca, you're free to go. I'm sure you have. Reports to file or something. Reports to file. That was how they saw my role. The dutiful daughter pushing papers while their golden son claimed the throne. I gathered my things slowly, watching as they huddled around Marcus, already discussing his grand vision for the company's future. A vision, I knew, that would likely lead to disaster within months without my constant oversight. As I reached the door, Mr. Thompson called out, "Rebecca, a moment, please?" I paused, turning back to see him holding out a business card. My direct line, he said quietly, in case you have any questions about the arrangements. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of knowledge perhaps, that made me take the card. I nodded and left, the sound of my family's animated planning session fading as I walked down the hallway. The parking garage felt cavernous and empty, my footsteps echoing off concrete walls as I made my way to my car. I'd parked in my usual spot, the one marked VP Operations, wondering how long it would be before Marcus had it repainted with his name. Probably by Monday. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my assistant and the only person who truly understood the scope of what I did for Bradford Industries. Emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning. Marcus wants to restructure the entire Asia division. Please tell me you're still coming in? I stared at the message, feeling the weight of the past decade pressing down on me. The Asia division was our most profitable sector, a complex network of relationships and contracts I'd personally negotiated over countless red-eye flights and grueling negotiations. Marcus had never even visited our offices there. Another text followed. Also, got a weird call from someone named Victoria Chen. Says she needs to speak with you urgently about Project Silent Guardian. What should I tell her? Project Silent Guardian. The code name I'd given to my most sensitive work, the countless times I'd saved the company from Marcus's mistakes without anyone knowing. Victoria Chen was our forensic accountant in Singapore, one of the few people who knew the full extent of my shadow operations. I sat in my car, engine off, watching the concrete ceiling as if it might offer answers. Everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed, was being handed to someone who couldn't tell a balance sheet from a bid proposal. But that sealed letter nagged at me. What did my parents know? What were they protecting? My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. The caller. ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Rebecca Bradford? The voice was elderly, refined, with a slight tremor. This is Eleanor Whitmore. I was your grandfather's personal secretary for 40 years. I heard about today's meeting, and I think it's time you knew the truth about Bradford Industries, and about that letter. My heart stopped. Grandfather had built Bradford Industries from nothing, turning it into an empire before his death 15 years ago. Eleanor Whitmore was a legend in our company's history, though she'd retired long before I joined. What truth? I asked, gripping the steering wheel. The truth about who really built this company, my dear. And why your parents have spent years trying to rewrite history. Can you meet me tonight? There's a small cafe on Meridian Street, the Blue Door. 8 o'clock? I glanced back at the law office building, where my family was still planning. A future built on delusions. I'll be there. As I started my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew about my family, my role, and the company I'd given everything to was about to change. The sealed letter suddenly felt less like a formality and more like a ticking time bomb. The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Anger at the injustice, hurt at the dismissal, but also a growing curiosity about what Eleanor Whitmore might reveal. I'd always wondered why certain old-timers at the company treated me with a reverence that seemed disproportionate to my official title. Why veteran board members sometimes slipped and called me the real Bradford when they thought no one was listening. My apartment, a modest 2-bedroom I'd bought with my own salary rather than family money, felt like a sanctuary as I stepped inside. The walls were lined with industry awards and commendations. Not the flashy 40 under 40 lists Marcus loved to chase, but serious recognition from trade organizations and international business councils. Awards my parents had never bothered to attend the ceremonies for. I changed out of my business suit into something more comfortable and sat at my desk, pulling out a locked drawer I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters from my grandfather, written during his final months. I'd been too young to fully understand them when he died, but I'd kept them, sensing their importance. My dearest Rebecca, one began. You have the true Bradford spirit. The quiet strength that builds empires while others chase shadows. Never let them dim your light. The words felt prophetic now. Had he known what would happen? Had he seen the pattern already forming in my parents' treatment of Marcus and me? My laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Victoria Chen. Unusual. Activity detected in Marcus's latest venture accounts. Pattern matches previous incidents. Shall I proceed with Protocol 7? Protocol 7. Our code for discreetly protecting company assets from internal threats. I'd used it 3 times before, each time preventing Marcus's failed ventures from dragging down the parent company. Each time my parents remained blissfully unaware of how close we'd come to disaster. I typed back, hold for now. Significant developments today. We'll advise tomorrow. As 8 o'clock approached, I found myself driving through the rain-slicked streets toward the Blue Door Cafe, my grandfather's letters tucked safely in my bag. Eleanor Whitmore represented a link to the company's past, to the grandfather who'd seen something in me that my own parents refused to acknowledge. The sealed letter, the mysterious Protocol 7, the cryptic warnings from company veterans, all the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed were suddenly falling into place. And somehow, I knew that by the time this night was over, the truth would change everything. The question was I ready for what that truth might reveal? The Blue Door Cafe was tucked away in a quiet corner of Meridian Street, its weathered sign barely visible in the evening drizzle. As I pushed open the heavy wooden door, a bell chimed softly, and the rich aroma of coffee and aged books enveloped me. The interior was dimly lit, with small tables scattered throughout, and walls lined with vintage photographs of the city's industrial heyday. Eleanor Whitmore sat at a corner table, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, her posture still commanding despite her advanced years. She wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of old money and timeless style. As I approached, her sharp blue eyes assessed me with an intensity that made me understand why my grandfather had trusted her implicitly. "Rebecca," she said, rising with surprising grace. "You look so much like him. Please, sit." I settled into the chair across from her, noticing the leather portfolio beside her teacup. The cafe was nearly empty, with only a lone barista behind the counter and soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. "Thank you for meeting me, Mrs. Whitmore," I began, but she raised a hand to stop me. "Eleanor, please. And I should be thanking you. I've watched from afar as you've held Bradford Industries together, often wondering when someone would finally tell you the truth." She poured me a cup of tea from an ornate pot, her movements precise and deliberate. "Your grandfather would be proud of what you've accomplished, especially considering the obstacles your parents have placed in your path." The directness of her statement caught me off guard. "You know about that?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor's laugh was soft but carried an edge. "My dear, I know everything about Bradford Industries. I was there when your grandfather built it from a single factory into an empire. I was there when he made the decisions that would shape its future. And I was there when your parents began their systematic campaign to erase your role in the company's survival." She opened the leather portfolio and withdrew a stack of documents, their edges yellowed with age. "Before we proceed, I need to know, are you prepared to learn truths that will fundamentally change your understanding of your family and your place in it?" I thought of the meeting earlier that day, of my parents' casual dismissal of a decade of my work, of Marcus's smug certainty that he deserved everything. "I'm ready," I said firmly. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Your grandfather, James Bradford, was a visionary, but he was also pragmatic. He recognized early on that your father lacked the strategic thinking necessary to lead the company. William was charming, yes, and excellent at networking, but he couldn't see beyond the next quarter's profits." She slid a document across the table. It was a memo dated 25 years ago, written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. I read, "William's proposal to expand into luxury markets shows fundamental misunderstanding of our core strengths. His vision is driven by status rather than strategy. I fear for the company's future under his leadership." Your grandfather began planning for succession long before his death, Eleanor continued. He established a series of trusts and corporate structures designed to protect the company from imprudent leadership. But he needed someone with the right combination of intelligence, work ethic, and integrity to activate these safeguards. "And that person was supposed to be me?" I asked, struggling to process this information. "Not originally," Eleanor admitted. "Initially, he hoped your father would grow into the role. When that didn't happen, he looked to the next generation. He watched both you and Marcus carefully from childhood." She produced another document, this one a psychological evaluation report. "He had both of you assessed by industrial psychologists when you were teenagers. Marcus scored high on charisma and self-confidence, but showed concerning patterns of risk-taking and lack of attention to detail. You, on the other hand, demonstrated exceptional analytical abilities, strategic thinking, and what the psychologist called quiet leadership potential." I remembered those tests vaguely. My parents had told me they were routine evaluations, for insurance purposes. Another lie, apparently. "Your grandfather began restructuring the company in his final years," Eleanor explained. "He created a shadow board of directors, established offshore holding companies, and most importantly, set up what he called the Guardian Protocol." Guardian Protocol? The name sent a chill down my spine. That's similar to what I've been calling my own protective measures. Eleanor's eyes sparkled. "Not a coincidence, my dear. You've been unconsciously following the blueprint he laid out. Every time you've stepped in to save the company from Marcus's failures, you've been fulfilling the role your grandfather envisioned." She pulled out a thick manila envelope. "This contains documentation of every major decision you've made in the past decade, cross-referenced with your grandfather's strategic plans. The correlation is remarkable. It's as if he predicted exactly what challenges the company would face and knew you would be the one to address them." I opened the envelope, my hands trembling slightly. Inside were detailed reports, financial analyses, and strategic assessments, all documenting my interventions over the years. Each one was annotated in my grandfather's handwriting with notes like, "exactly as anticipated," and "Rebecca will know what to do." "But how could he have known?" I asked, overwhelmed by the implications. "Because he understood patterns," Eleanor replied. "He saw how your parents favored Marcus, how they mistook flash for substance. He predicted they would try to hand him the company, and that it would lead to disaster. So he created a failsafe." "The sealed letter," I whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. Eleanor nodded. "The letter is part of a larger mechanism. Your grandfather established a series of triggers that would activate if certain conditions were met. Significant financial losses, questionable business practices, or attempts to fundamentally alter the company's structure without proper justification." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Rebecca, your parents don't actually have the power to give the company to Marcus. Not entirely. The corporate structure your grandfather created includes provisions that require demonstrated competence and board approval for any major leadership changes. The shadow board has been watching, waiting for the right moment to act." "Who's on this shadow board?" I asked, my mind racing with the implications. "Senior executives who've been with the company for decades, international partners who respected your grandfather, and a few external advisors who've maintained their fiduciary duty in secret. They've been documenting everything: Marcus's failures, your interventions, the true state of the company's finances." Eleanor reached across the table and grasped my hand. "They're prepared to act, but they need you to take the first step. The sealed letter contains instructions for revealing the true corporate structure and your grandfather's intentions, but it can only be opened under specific circumstances. What circumstances? Evidence of gross mismanagement or an attempt to transfer control that would harm the company's long-term interests. Eleanor's grip tightened. Your parents' decision today to immediately install Marcus as CEO qualifies. They've triggered the very safeguards your grandfather put in place. I sat back, trying to absorb the magnitude of what I was learning. My entire life, I'd believed I was fighting alone to save the family company. Instead, I'd been part of an elaborate plan designed by a grandfather who'd seen the future with stunning clarity. There's more, Eleanor said, sliding another document toward me. This is a copy of your grandfather's true will, not the one your parents presented after his death. In it, he established a trust that would transfer controlling interest in Bradford Industries to whichever of his grandchildren demonstrated the greatest commitment to the company's core values and long-term success. I scanned the document, my eyes widening at the language. It was clear, unambiguous, and legally binding. The trust was to be administered by the Shadow Board with specific metrics for evaluation. Based on those metrics, I had earned controlling interest years ago. Why wasn't this revealed earlier? I asked, anger creeping into my voice. Why let me struggle for so long believing I was worthless in my family's eyes? Eleanor's expression softened with sympathy. Your grandfather believed that true leaders are forged in adversity. He wanted you to develop your skills naturally, to prove your worth not just to others but to yourself. Every challenge you've overcome, every crisis you've managed, has prepared you for this moment. She gestured to the portfolio. Everything you need is here. Documentation of the true corporate structure, records of the Shadow Board's activities, evidence of your contributions, and instructions for activating the succession protocol. But once you begin this process, there's no turning back. Your relationship with your parents will be forever altered. I thought about my mother's dismissive attitude, my father's casual cruelty in the lawyer's office. I think that relationship was altered long ago, I said quietly. Eleanor nodded understanding. Your grandfather included a personal letter for you to be delivered when the time came. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in his familiar script. With trembling fingers, I opened it and read, My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then my fears about your parents have proven correct, and you've discovered the truth about your role in Bradford Industries. I want you to know that every decision I made was designed to protect both you and the company I spent my life building. I saw in you what your parents refused to acknowledge, a brilliant mind, unwavering integrity, and the rare ability to lead without needing the spotlight. You have the Bradford spirit that skips generations, the quiet strength that builds empires. The path ahead will be difficult. Your parents will feel betrayed, and Marcus will resist the truth. But remember this. You are not taking anything that wasn't already rightfully yours. You've earned your position through years of dedication and sacrifice. The Shadow Board has my complete confidence, as do you. Trust in the systems I've put in place, but more importantly, trust in yourself. You are more prepared for this than you know. Lead with wisdom, act with integrity, and never forget that true power lies not in titles or inheritance, but in the respect you earn through your actions. With all my love and faith in your future, grandfather. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. All these years, I'd carried the weight of feeling unseen, unvalued by my own family. To know that someone had seen me, had believed in me enough to build an entire succession plan around my potential. It was overwhelming. What happens now? I asked Eleanor, wiping my eyes. Now you have a choice, she replied. You can continue as you have been, quietly saving the company from the shadows, or you can step into the light and claim your rightful place. The Shadow Board is meeting tomorrow evening. They're prepared to execute the succession protocol if you give the word. She began gathering the documents back into the portfolio. Take tonight to review everything. The legal mechanisms are already in place. Your parents' attempt to bypass proper corporate governance has activated clauses they didn't even know existed. By trying to install Marcus without board approval, they've inadvertently triggered the very safeguards designed to prevent such actions. As Eleanor organized the papers, she continued, Your grandfather's lawyers, not the ones your parents use, but his personal legal team, have been maintaining these structures for years. They're ready to file the necessary paperwork the moment you decide to act. She handed me the portfolio. This contains everything: financial records, legal documents, correspondence between Shadow Board members, and a detailed timeline of your interventions over the past decade. It's irrefutable evidence of who has truly been running Bradford Industries. I accepted the portfolio, feeling its weight, not just physical, but symbolic. And the sealed letter at Thompson's office? A decoy. Eleanor smiled. Your grandfather knew your parents would need to believe they had control. The real documents have been safely stored in multiple locations, with copies held by each Shadow Board member. Thompson himself is unaware of the full structure, though he suspects something given his instructions. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor placed a hand on my arm. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about corporate control or family dynamics. Bradford Industries employs thousands of people, supports entire communities. Your grandfather built this company on principles of integrity and responsibility. Under Marcus's leadership, all of that would be at risk. I nodded, remembering the times I'd quietly prevented layoffs Marcus had planned to fund his lavish lifestyle or saved community programs he wanted to cut for short-term gains. One more thing, Eleanor said as we stood. The Shadow Board includes someone you know well, someone who's been advocating for you all along, Sarah, your assistant. My jaw dropped. Sarah? Your grandfather was impressed by her intelligence and loyalty. He recruited her personally before his death, tasking her with watching over you and reporting to the board. Every emergency she's brought to your attention was carefully selected to test and develop your leadership skills. The revelations kept coming, each one reshaping my understanding of the past decade. As we walked toward the door, Eleanor handed me a business card. My private number. The Shadow Board meets tomorrow at 8 p.m. at the old Bradford factory, the original site, where your grandfather started the company. If you decide to attend, everything changes. Standing in the doorway of the Blue Door Cafe, rain still falling softly outside, I felt as though I was standing at the threshold of two different futures. Behind me lay years of thankless work and family dismissal. Ahead lay the opportunity to claim my rightful place, but at the cost of open conflict with my parents. Your grandfather used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, Eleanor said softly, but the recognition that something else is more important than fear. The question is, what's more important to you? As I stepped into the rainy night, portfolio clutched to my chest, I already knew my answer. The company, the employees, the communities we served, they were all more important than my fear of family conflict. It was time to step out of the shadows and into the role I'd been unknowingly preparing for my entire life. The drive home was filled with a mixture of emotions: anger at the deception, gratitude for my grandfather's foresight, and a growing sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and change, but for the first time in years, I felt truly seen and valued. The sealed letter at Thompson's office was indeed a decoy, but the real revelation had been unsealed tonight. The truth, it turned out, had been waiting patiently for me all along, preserved by a grandfather who had seen in me what my own parents refused to acknowledge. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I realized that Eleanor was right. There was no turning back now. The inheritance my parents thought they controlled was already mine, earned through years of dedication and proven competence. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of claiming it, not just for myself, but for the company and all those who depended on it. The golden child was about to discover that all that glitters is not gold, and sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is not money or position, but the trust and foresight of someone who truly understood what leadership means. The night following my meeting with Eleanor Whitmore passed in a blur of document review and strategic planning. My apartment's dining table disappeared beneath carefully organized stacks of papers: financial statements, corporate bylaws, shadow, board correspondence, and my grandfather's detailed succession protocols. Each document revealed another layer of the intricate web he had woven to protect Bradford Industries from the very scenario now unfolding. As dawn broke, I had compiled a comprehensive timeline of the past decade. On one side, Marcus's failures, each meticulously documented. The European expansion disaster that lost $12 million. The tech startup acquisition that proved worthless. The marketing campaign that damaged our brand in Asian markets. On the other side, my interventions. Restructuring debt to save $30 million, negotiating partnerships that opened new revenue streams, implementing quality controls that prevented massive recalls. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Yet my parents had remained willfully blind, seeing only what confirmed their predetermined narrative of Marcus as the natural heir. My phone buzzed with Sarah's morning check-in. Emergency board meeting called for 10 a.m. Marcus wants to announce restructuring. Plans. Should I clear your schedule? I stared at the message, knowing now that Sarah's true role extended far beyond administrative support. She had been my guardian angel, strategically filtering information and guiding me toward crises that needed my attention. Every emergency had been a test. Every crisis an opportunity to demonstrate my capabilities to the shadow board. Clear my schedule for the entire day, I replied. And Sarah, we need to talk. Face to face. 1 hour. Her response came immediately. Understood. Your office or mine? The old conference room on the 15th floor. The one nobody used anymore, where important conversations could happen without interruption. As I dressed for what promised to be a pivotal day, I selected my outfit carefully: a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without ostentation, a subtle silver pin my grandfather had given me for my 16th birthday. The weight of the ICE portfolio Eleanor had given me felt substantial in my leather briefcase. Bradford Industries headquarters rose 40 stories above downtown, its gleaming facade a testament to my grandfather's vision. I arrived early, using my executive keycard to access the 15th floor. The old conference room remained frozen in time, its wood paneling and vintage furnishings a reminder of the company's heritage. Sarah was already there, standing by the window, overlooking the city. She turned as I entered, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "You met with Eleanor," she said. It wasn't a question. "You've been reporting to the shadow board this entire time," I responded, setting my briefcase on the table. Sarah nodded slowly. "Your grandfather recruited me during my final semester at business school. He saw something in me, just as he saw something in you. My assignment was to support and protect you while documenting evidence of your leadership abilities." I sank into one of the leather chairs, processing this revelation. Every crisis you brought to my attention was carefully selected to develop specific skills, Sarah confirmed. The supply chain disruption in 2019 tested your negotiation abilities. The quality control issues in 2021 demonstrated your technical knowledge. The union disputes last year proved your people management skills. And you reported everything back to the shadow board. Every success, every solution, every innovation. Sarah moved to sit across from me. "Rebecca, you have no idea how many times I wanted to tell you the truth. Watching you doubt yourself, seeing your parents' dismissal eat away at your confidence, it was excruciating. I thought back to late nights when Sarah had stayed to help with crisis management, weekends when she'd volunteered to assist with complex projects. I'd always assumed it was exceptional dedication to her job. Instead, it had been a mission to document my capabilities. "Who else is on the shadow board?" I asked. Sarah pulled out a sealed envelope from her portfolio. "I'm authorized to reveal this now that Eleanor has initiated contact." She slid the envelope across the table. 12 members total. Some you know, others have been working behind the scenes. I opened the envelope to find a list of names, each with a brief description. Richard Chen, CFO of Bradford. Asia Pacific, Dr. Margaret Holbrook, Head of R&D. Thomas Nakamura, Lead Counsel for International Operations. Maria Santos, VP of Supply Chain Management. James Wilson, Retired Board Member. Victoria Kumar, Director of Strategic Initiatives. Samuel Okafor, Head of African Operations. Hans Muller, European Division President. Sarah Martinez, Executive Assistant. Eleanor Whitmore, Secretary Emeritus. Patricia Goldman, External Auditor. Dr. Robert Chang, Industrial, Psychology Consultant. "These people have been watching me for years?" I asked, recognizing most names as respected senior executives. "Watching, documenting, and protecting," Sarah clarified. "Every time Marcus made a catastrophic decision, the shadow board worked behind the scenes to minimize damage. But, more importantly, they've been building an ironclad case for your succession." A knock at the door interrupted us. Sarah rose to answer it, admitting Victoria Kumar, whose name I'd just read on the shadow board list. Victoria was a formidable woman in her 50s, known for her strategic brilliance and no-nonsense approach. "Rebecca," she said, extending her hand, "we don't have much time. Marcus's board meeting starts in an hour, and what he's planning will devastate the company." She placed a tablet on the table, displaying a presentation titled Bradford 2.0, A New Vision. Marcus intends to announce the immediate closure of 3 manufacturing facilities, the elimination of our entire R&D department, and a pivot toward luxury branding, Victoria explained, swiping through slides. He's also planning to sell off our patents portfolio to fund a massive marketing campaign. My blood ran cold. Those facilities employed thousands of people in communities that depended on us. Our R&D department had 17 active projects that represented our future. The patents portfolio was worth billions and represented decades of innovation. "This would destroy everything my grandfather built," I said, anger rising in my voice. "Exactly," Victoria replied. "Which is why the Shadow Board voted unanimously last night to activate the succession protocol. But we need your consent to proceed." She produced another document, a formal resolution drafted by the Shadow Board. It outlined the activation of my grandfather's trust provisions, the immediate suspension of Marcus's appointment pending board review, and the installation of interim leadership while proper governance procedures were followed. "Once we file this, your parents will realize they've been outmaneuvered," Victoria warned. "The confrontation will be public and potentially ugly." I stood, walking to the window where Sarah had been earlier. The city stretched below, buildings housing businesses and families whose lives would be affected by what happened in the next few hours. My grandfather had trusted me with this responsibility, had spent years ensuring I would be ready for this moment. "File it," I said, turning back to face them. "But I want to handle the board meeting myself. Marcus deserves to hear the truth from me, not from lawyers or documents." Victoria and Sarah exchanged glances. "That could be dangerous," Sarah cautioned. "Your parents will be there, along with board members loyal to them. They need to understand that this isn't a coup or a power grab," I insisted. "This is about protecting the company and honoring its true legacy." If I hide behind legal maneuvers, I'm no better than they are. Victoria nodded slowly. Your grandfather said you'd choose the direct approach. He called it leadership by example. Very well. The shadow board will be present but remain anonymous until needed. We've arranged for certain documents to be delivered to the board meeting at precisely the right moment. As they prepared to leave, I had one more question. The sealed letter at Thompson's office, what's really in it? Victoria smiled grimly. A detailed confession from your grandfather about how he deliberately structured the company to prevent exactly what your parents are attempting. It includes evidence of their previous attempts to undermine the proper succession process and documentation of Marcus's unfitness for leadership. It's the nuclear option, to be used only if all else fails. The next hour passed quickly as I prepared for the confrontation ahead. I reviewed Marcus's presentation, identifying every flaw in his logic, every devastating consequence of his proposals. I also studied the Shadow Board's counterproposal, a strategic plan that would strengthen the company while preserving its core values. At 9:55 a.m., I entered the main boardroom on the 40th floor. The room was already filled with board members, senior executives, and my family. Marcus stood at the head of the table, designer suit impeccable, radiating the confidence of someone who believed his victory was assured. My parents sat to his right, my mother wearing her charitable foundation smile, my father looking every inch the patriarch ready to pass the torch. They barely glanced at me as I took a seat near the back. Now that everyone's here, Marcus began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone who'd rehearsed extensively, I'd like to present my vision for Bradford Industries' future. As he launched into his presentation, I watched the faces around the table. Some board members nodded enthusiastically, the ones my parents had carefully cultivated over the years. Others, including several I now knew were shadow board members, maintained carefully neutral expressions. Marcus reached the slide about closing manufacturing facilities. These outdated plants are dragging down our profit margins, he declared. By eliminating them, we can redirect resources toward building a luxury brand that commands premium prices. I could remain silent no longer. What about the 3,000 employees who depend on those jobs? I asked, my voice cutting through his smooth delivery. Marcus faltered for a moment before recovering. Progress requires difficult decisions, Rebecca. I'm sure you understand that. I understand that those facilities are profitable and essential to our supply chain, I countered. I should know. I restructured their operations 2 years ago, resulting in a 15% efficiency increase. A murmur ran through the room. Several board members were now looking at me with renewed interest. Furthermore, I continued standing. To address the room directly, your proposal to sell our patent portfolio would eliminate our competitive advantage in 7 key markets. Those patents represent billions in future revenue. Marcus's face reddened. Rebecca, this isn't your meeting. If you can't support the new leadership— What new leadership? I interrupted. The one that was installed without proper board approval? The one that violates our corporate bylaws and governance protocols? My father rose from his chair. Rebecca, that's enough. You're out of line. No, Dad. I'm exactly in line, with grandfather's vision for this company. I pulled out the portfolio Eleanor had given me. For 10 years, I've been quietly saving Bradford Industries from one disaster after another. Every time Marcus nearly bankrupted us with his schemes, I cleaned up the mess. Every time his decisions threatened jobs or communities, I found solutions. The room had gone deadly silent. I placed document after document on the table. Financial records, crisis management reports, testimonials from saved divisions. This isn't about sibling rivalry or hurt feelings, I declared. This is about the fundamental future of a company that employs thousands and serves millions. Marcus's plan would destroy everything grandfather built. You're just jealous, my mother interjected, her composure cracking. You've always resented Marcus's natural leadership abilities. Before I could respond, the boardroom doors opened. A courier entered, delivering sealed envelopes to each board member. "What is this?" my father demanded. Richard Chen, whom I now knew was a shadow, board member spoke up. "These are notices of an emergency board resolution, triggered by violations of corporate governance protocols." He opened his envelope and began reading aloud. "In accordance with Article 12, Section 3 of Bradford Industries bylaws, any leadership transition must be approved by a 2/3 majority of the board following proper evaluation procedures." Board members began opening their envelopes, reading the contents with growing alarm. The shadow board had struck with precision timing. "This is ridiculous," Marcus blustered. "I'm the rightful heir to Bradford Industries." "Actually, Thomas," Nakamura interjected, "according to James Bradford's trust documents, leadership succession is based on demonstrated competence and commitment to corporate values, not birthright." I watched as understanding dawned on my parents' faces. They were realizing, too late, that they'd walked into a carefully laid trap, one designed by my grandfather to protect the company from exactly this scenario. Dr. Margaret Holbrook stood next. "I move to suspend all leadership transitions pending a full board review and compliance audit." "Seconded," said 3 voices simultaneously. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. "This is a conspiracy. You're trying to steal the company from our family." "No, William," Eleanor Whitmore's voice rang out from the back of the room. She had entered unnoticed during the commotion. "We're trying to save it from those who would destroy it through ignorance and ego." Eleanor walked to the front of the room, every inch the formidable executive secretary she had been. "Your father knew this day would come. He spent years preparing for it, putting safeguards in place to ensure Bradford Industries would survive your mismanagement." She turned to address the full board. "I have here documentation of every major decision made in the past decade, comparing Marcus's proposals with Rebecca's interventions. The evidence is irrefutable. Rebecca has been the true leader of this company, working tirelessly behind the scenes while being systematically undermined by her own family." The shadow board members began revealing themselves, each sharing specific examples of my leadership and Marcus's failures. The regular board members listened with growing concern as the full picture emerged. Marcus attempted one final offensive. "This is all circumstantial. I have the vision to take Bradford Industries into the future." "Your vision involves destroying our manufacturing base, eliminating research and development, and selling off our intellectual property," I responded calmly. "That's not leadership. It's corporate suicide." I pulled out my grandfather's letter, reading key passages aloud. The room fell silent as his words echoed across the years, predicting this exact scenario and expressing his faith in my abilities. When I finished, the vote was swift and decisive. The board unanimously suspended Marcus's appointment and initiated a formal review process. My parents sat in stunned silence as their carefully constructed plans crumbled around them. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached me one by one, many expressing regret for not seeing the truth sooner. The shadow board members remained, professional but allowed themselves small smiles of satisfaction. Marcus stormed out, followed by our parents. My mother paused at the door, looking back at me with a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of recognition. Eleanor approached me as the room emptied. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said softly. "You handled that with exactly the grace and strength he knew you possessed." "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline faded. "Now, the real work begins," she replied. "The board will conduct its review, but the outcome is already clear. The shadow board's documentation is comprehensive and irrefutable. The question is, are you ready to step into the role you've already been fulfilling?" I looked around the boardroom where so many crucial decisions had been made over the years. My grandfather had built this company on principles of integrity, innovation, and responsibility. Under my parents' misguided favoritism, those principles had nearly been lost. But the safeguards had held, the truth had emerged, and the future, my future, was finally clear. "I've been ready for years," I answered. "I just didn't know it until now." As I left the boardroom, I realized that this wasn't just about inheritance or corporate control. It was about validation, not from my parents, who might never truly see me, but from the one person whose opinion had mattered most. My grandfather had seen my potential long before anyone else, had believed in me enough to build an entire succession plan around my abilities. The golden child had fallen, not through malice or revenge, but through the simple revelation of truth. And in that truth, I had found not just my inheritance, but my purpose. The aftermath of the boardroom confrontation sent shockwaves through Bradford Industries. Within hours, the corporate grapevine was buzzing with rumors about shadow boards, secret succession plans, and long-buried company secrets. I spent the rest of that day fielding calls from confused department heads and concerned stakeholders, trying to maintain stability while the foundations of our corporate structure shifted beneath us. My immediate priority was damage control. Marcus had already begun spreading his version of events, painting himself as the victim of a corporate coup. His narrative found eager ears among certain board members who had benefited from my parents' largesse over the years. The battle for Bradford Industries was far from over. It had merely shifted from the boardroom to the court of corporate opinion. That evening, I convened an emergency meeting with the shadow board members in a secure conference room on the 35th floor. The space had been swept for listening devices, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid a week ago, but now felt necessary given the stakes involved. "We need to move quickly," Thomas Nakamura advised, spreading legal documents across the table. "Your parents are already mobilizing their legal team. They're planning to challenge the validity of the Shadow Board's authority in court." Victoria Kumar nodded grimly. "I've heard rumblings from our Asian divisions. Marcus has been making calls, promising promotions and bonuses to anyone who supports his claim to leadership." "Let him make promises," Richard Chen interjected. "We have something more powerful than empty words. We have evidence." Eleanor Whitmore, who had been quietly observing the discussion, finally spoke. "It's time to deploy the nuclear option. James anticipated this exact scenario." She turned to me with a knowing look. "The sealed letter at Thompson's office wasn't the only safeguard your grandfather created." My pulse quickened. "What else is there?" Eleanor reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small key. "There's a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Your grandfather instructed that it should only be opened if the company faced an existential threat from within. I believe we've reached that threshold." The next morning, accompanied by Thomas and 2 security personnel, I entered the hushed marble interior of First National Bank. The safety deposit box was in the highest security section, requiring both Eleanor's key and a biometric scan that had been programmed with my fingerprints years ago, another indication of my grandfather's foresight. Inside the box lay 3 items: a thick manila envelope, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter addressed to me. With trembling hands, I opened the letter first. "Dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have been realized. The company I built is under threat not from external forces, but from those who should be its guardians. The contents of this box represent my final insurance policy, evidence that will protect Bradford Industries and validate your role as its rightful leader. The envelope contains documentation of every major decision made during your father's tenure as CEO, including several that were deliberately hidden from the board. The USB drive holds recordings of conversations that will explain why I structured the succession plan as I did. Use these materials wisely, but do not hesitate to use them. Sometimes the truth must be revealed, no matter how painful. With love, and complete confidence in your abilities, grandfather. The manila envelope contained explosive material. Financial records showed that my father had repeatedly diverted company funds to cover Marcus's failed ventures, hiding the losses through creative accounting. There were emails documenting his attempts to marginalize senior executives who questioned these decisions. Most damning were the minutes from a private meeting where he explicitly stated his intention to install Marcus as CEO, regardless of the board's recommendations. The USB drive was even more revealing. It contained audio recordings of conversations between my grandfather and father, dated just months before his death. In one particularly heated exchange, my grandfather's voice rang clear. "William, you cannot seriously believe Marcus is qualified to lead this company. Every venture you've funded for him has failed. Meanwhile, Rebecca has single-handedly saved 3 divisions from bankruptcy." My father's response was defensive and angry. "She's just lucky. Marcus has vision. He thinks big. Rebecca is too conservative, too risk-averse." "You mistake recklessness for vision and prudence for timidity," my grandfather countered. "I've watched them both carefully. Rebecca has the true Bradford spirit, the ability to see what needs to be done and the courage to do it, without seeking glory or recognition." The conversation continued, with my grandfather outlining his concerns about my father's judgment and his plans to protect the company. It was clear that the shadow board wasn't a sudden decision, but the culmination of years of careful observation and growing concern. Armed with this evidence, I returned to the office to find a formal legal notice on my desk. My parents were seeking an emergency injunction to prevent any leadership changes pending a full legal review. They were also demanding access to all shadow board records and communications. "They're trying to buy time," Thomas explained when I called him. "If they can delay the transition long enough, they might find a way to invalidate the shadow board's authority." I made a decision that would prove pivotal. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. It's time to bring this into the light." The corporate communications team worked through the night preparing materials. We created a comprehensive presentation that laid out the facts without sensationalism, the company's performance under different leadership, the legal structure of the shadow board, and the evidence supporting the need for change. The press conference was held in our main auditorium, with financial journalists from every major publication in attendance. I stood at the podium, feeling the weight of generations of Bradford leadership on my shoulders. Bradford Industries stands at a crossroads, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. For the past decade, this company has survived not because of its official leadership, but in spite of it. Today, I'm here to present evidence that will explain why change is not just necessary, but critical for our survival. For the next hour, I methodically presented our case. Financial charts showed the stark contrast between divisions I had overseen and those under Marcus's control. Legal documents established the legitimacy of the shadow board structure. Most powerfully, I played select recordings from the USB drive, letting my grandfather's words speak directly to his intentions. The journalists were riveted. Questions flew fast and furious. "Ms. Bradford, are you saying your brother is unqualified to lead?" "I'm saying the evidence speaks for itself. Leadership should be based on demonstrated ability, not family privilege." "What about claims that this is a personal vendetta?" "This isn't about personal feelings. It's about protecting 15,000 jobs and honoring the legacy of a company that has been a cornerstone of American industry for 60 years. The press conference had its intended effect. By afternoon, financial analysts were dissecting our claims, and the consensus was overwhelming. The data supported our position. Bradford Industries' stock price, which had been declining amid leadership uncertainty, began to stabilize. My parents' response was swift and predictable. They held their own press conference with Marcus front and center, denouncing what they called a corporate conspiracy and a betrayal of family values. But without hard evidence to counter our documentation, their arguments rang hollow. The legal maneuvering intensified over the next week. My parents filed multiple lawsuits challenging everything from the shadow board's formation to my grandfather's mental state in his final years. Each filing was met with meticulously prepared counterarguments from our legal team. During this time, I received an unexpected visit from Margaret Chen, a respected business journalist who had covered Bradford Industries for decades. She had interviewed my grandfather multiple times and had watched our family drama unfold from a unique vantage point. "Off the record," she said, settling into a chair in my office. "I've been waiting for this day for years. Your grandfather confided in me about his concerns. He knew your parents would never see your true value." "Why didn't he act sooner?" I asked, voicing a question that had haunted me since discovering the truth. "He believed in giving people a chance to grow into wisdom," Margaret explained. "He hoped your father would eventually recognize your abilities. When it became clear that wouldn't happen, he put his safeguards in place." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "But there's something else you should know. I've been investigating Marcus's business dealings independently. There are connections to some questionable overseas investments that could damage the company's reputation if they come to light. This was new information and potentially explosive." Margaret shared her findings. Marcus had been using his position to pursue personal ventures in emerging markets, some involving partners with ties to money laundering investigations. "I haven't published anything yet," she continued, "because I wanted to see how this succession battle played out. But if Marcus were to take control of Bradford Industries, I would have an ethical obligation to reveal what I've found." I sat back, absorbing the implications. This wasn't just about corporate leadership anymore. It was about protecting the company from potential criminal liability. That evening, the Shadow Board convened for another emergency meeting. When I presented Margaret's information, the mood turned grave. "This changes everything," Victoria Kumar stated. "We're not just fighting for control. We're fighting to prevent a potential legal catastrophe." Eleanor, ever the voice of experience, offered strategic counsel. "We need to present this information to the full board immediately. Even those loyal to your parents will have to reconsider their position when faced with potential criminal exposure." The special board meeting was called for the following morning. As directors filed into the boardroom, the tension was palpable. My parents sat at one end of the table, their lawyers arrayed behind them like a protective wall. Marcus appeared confident, still believing his charm could sway opinion in his favor. I began with a careful presentation of the new evidence, walking the board through the web of questionable investments and partnerships. As the implications became clear, I watched the color drain from several directors' faces. Even those previously sympathetic to my parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "These allegations are baseless," Marcus erupted when I finished. "This is nothing but a smear campaign." "Then you won't mind if we initiate a full forensic audit of these transactions?" Thomas Nakamura asked smoothly. The room fell silent. Marcus looked to our parents for support, but my father seemed stunned by the revelations, while my mother appeared to be reassessing everything she thought she knew about her golden child. Board member James Wilson, who had previously supported my parents, cleared his throat. "In light of this information, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the proposed leadership transition to Marcus Bradford." The motion was seconded instantly. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Even my parents' closest allies couldn't ignore the potential legal ramifications. But the victory felt hollow as I watched my family's public humiliation. My mother was crying quietly, while my father stared at the table, his dreams of dynasty crashing around him. Marcus stormed out without a word, his carefully constructed image in tatters. After the meeting, I found my mother alone in the executive washroom, attempting to repair her tear-stained makeup. Our eyes met in the mirror, and for a moment, I saw not the woman who had dismissed me for years, but a mother grappling with the realization that she had fundamentally misjudged both her children. "Rebecca," she whispered, "how did we get it so wrong?" I had no easy answer. The patterns of favoritism had been set long before I was old enough to understand them. But standing there, watching my mother's pain, I realized that exposing the truth, while necessary, had extracted a heavy price from everyone involved. "We move forward," I said finally. "We rebuild trust, restructure properly, and ensure Bradford Industries survives for the next generation." The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. The board formally recognized the Shadow Board's authority and initiated a comprehensive review of corporate governance. Marcus resigned from all positions within the company, accepting a generous but conditional severance package that required him to divest all interests in his questionable overseas ventures. My parents retreated from public life, my father officially retiring as chairman emeritus, while my mother resigned from the various charitable boards where she had represented the Bradford name. Their withdrawal was presented as a planned transition, allowing them to maintain some dignity despite the circumstances. Throughout this period, I worked tirelessly to stabilize the company and reassure stakeholders. Department heads who had operated in uncertainty for years finally had clear direction. Employees who had feared for their jobs under Marcus's potential leadership expressed relief and renewed commitment. 1 month after the boardroom showdown, I sat in my grandfather's old office, now mine, reviewing transition plans with the senior leadership team. The company was stronger than ever, its governance structure transparent, its leadership merit-based rather than nepotistic. Eleanor entered carrying a final envelope. "There's one more thing," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Your grandfather left instructions that this should be given to you only after you had successfully navigated the transition." Inside was a simple note in his distinctive handwriting. "Never doubt that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, is always the best path forward. I knew you would find the strength to lead with integrity. The company is now truly yours, not by inheritance, but by earning it through courage and competence. Make me proud. Love, Grandfather." As I finished reading, I understood that the greatest inheritance wasn't the company or the wealth. It was the trust my grandfather had placed in me and the opportunity to prove worthy of that trust. The golden child had fallen, but in his place stood something far more valuable, a leader who had earned her position through merit, dedication, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Looking out over the city skyline, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders, but also the strength that came from knowing I had faced the truth and emerged stronger. The future of Bradford Industries was no longer clouded by family politics or misplaced loyalty. Instead, it was bright with the promise of what could be achieved when leadership was based on ability rather than birthright. The evidence had emerged. The truth had prevailed, and the company my grandfather built would continue to thrive. Not as a family dynasty, but as a testament to the power of earned success and principled leadership. The week following the dramatic board meeting transformed Bradford Industries into a corporate battlefield. My parents, reeling from their loss of control, had retained Morrison and Blackwell, the city's most aggressive law firm, to challenge the Shadow Board's authority and my grandfather's succession plan. Their strategy became clear when legal notices began arriving at my office, each one more threatening than the last. "They're claiming undue influence," Thomas Nakamura explained during our emergency strategy session in the executive conference room. The walls were lined with whiteboards covered in legal flowcharts and timelines. "They're alleging that your grandfather wasn't of sound mind when he created the Shadow Board structure." I studied the complaint, my anger rising with each paragraph. "He was sharp as a tack until his final day. They're really willing to tarnish his legacy to maintain control? Desperation makes people do terrible things," Eleanor Whitmore observed from her seat at the head of the table. Despite her official retirement, she had returned to guide us through the crisis. William never accepted that his father didn't trust him with the company. This is decades of resentment boiling over. Victoria Kumar spread financial documents across the table. They're also moving to freeze corporate assets pending resolution of the leadership dispute. If successful, it would paralyze operations within weeks. The implications were staggering. Payroll for thousands of employees, ongoing contracts with suppliers, critical research projects, all would grind to a halt. My parents were willing to destroy the company rather than accept they had been wrong about its leadership. "What's our legal position?" I asked Thomas. He adjusted his glasses, a habit I'd noticed when delivering difficult news. "Strong, but not invulnerable. Your grandfather's documents are meticulously crafted, but Morrison and Blackwell specializes in finding hairline cracks in seemingly airtight cases. They'll argue that the shadow board's secrecy invalidates its authority." Sarah entered the room carrying a stack of folders. "I've compiled every email, memo, and document showing the board's activities over the past decade. Everything was done according to corporate bylaws, just discreetly." "Discretion isn't illegality," Thomas noted, "but they'll try to paint it as a conspiracy." My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Last chance to step aside gracefully. This is going to get ugly." I showed the message to the group. Eleanor's expression hardened. "He's trying to intimidate you. Classic William tactic. Marcus learned from the master." "Let them try," I responded, surprising myself with my calm determination. "We have truth on our side." The first hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Judge Catherine Rawlings, known for her no-nonsense approach to corporate disputes, would preside. The weekend became a blur of preparation, with the Shadow Board's legal team working around the clock to build our defense. Sunday evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing testimony notes when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing in the hallway, looking smaller and older than I remembered. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Mom, may I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its usual commanding tone. I stepped aside, watching as she entered my modest apartment. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the awards on the walls, the stacks of work documents, the evidence of a life built on merit rather than privilege. "Rebecca," she began, settling onto my couch, "this has gone too far. Surely we can resolve this within the family." "We tried that," I reminded her. "You chose to ignore a decade of evidence about who was actually running the company." She flinched at my directness. "We always wanted what was best for both of you. Marcus needed more support." "Marcus needed accountability," I interrupted. "Instead, you enabled his failures while dismissing my successes. Now the company is at risk because of your blindness." For the first time, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. "Your father is devastated. He truly believed he was honoring his father's wishes." "Grandfather's wishes were clearly documented," I said firmly. "Dad chose to ignore them because they didn't align with his preferences." My mother stood, her designer handbag clutched tightly. "If you proceed with this legal action, it will tear the family apart." "The family was torn apart years ago," I replied softly. "When you decided Marcus's potential was worth more than my achievements." She left without another word, but her visit had revealed cracks in my parents' unified front. My father's ego might be driving the legal battle, but my mother was beginning to question their position. Monday morning arrived, with unseasonable cold and driving rain. The courthouse steps were slick with water as I climbed them, flanked by Thomas and Eleanor. Inside, the corridors buzzed with lawyers and clerks, the machinery of justice in constant motion. Courtroom 4B was imposing, with dark wood paneling and high ceilings that made every sound echo. My parents sat with their legal team on one side, Marcus beside them in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He smirked as I entered. but I noticed dark circles under his eyes. The stress was affecting him too. Judge Rawlings entered precisely at 9 a.m., her black robe swishing as she took her seat. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings," she announced without preamble. "This is a matter of corporate governance and succession planning, not a family therapy session. I expect professional conduct from all parties." Morrison and Blackwell's lead attorney, Jonathan Pierce, rose first. He was tall and silver-haired, with the commanding presence of someone used to winning. "Your Honor," he began, "we're here because of a conspiracy that undermines the very foundations of corporate law. A secret board, operating in shadows, claims authority over a publicly traded company. This is not just irregular, it's potentially criminal." He painted a picture of my grandfather as a paranoid old man, manipulated by advisors with their own agendas. The shadow board became a sinister cabal, and I was portrayed as an ambitious daughter exploiting legal technicalities to steal power from her rightful heir. Thomas rose for our response, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Pierce's theatrical presentation. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a conspiracy, but a carefully constructed safeguard. James Bradford, renowned for his business acumen, foresaw potential conflicts and created legal mechanisms to protect his company's interests. He methodically presented evidence, corporate documents showing the shadow board's legal foundation, records of their oversight activities, and most importantly, comparative analyses of Marcus's decisions versus my interventions. The shadow board didn't operate in darkness," Thomas explained. "They operated with discretion, documenting everything, preparing for this very moment when their authority might be challenged." The hearing stretched through the morning as both sides presented arguments. Judge Rawlings asked pointed questions, her keen intellect cutting through legal rhetoric to core issues. During a brief recess, I overheard my parents conferring with their lawyers. My father's face was flushed with anger, while my mother seemed increasingly uncomfortable. The evidence being presented was undeniable, and even they couldn't ignore it completely. After lunch, Judge Rawlings called for specific testimony about corporate performance. This was our strongest ground, and Victoria Kumar took the stand with devastating effectiveness. "In the past 5 years," she testified, "Marcus Bradford's initiatives resulted in losses exceeding $47 million. During the same period, Rebecca, Bradford's interventions generated over $200 million in savings and new revenue." She presented chart after chart, graph after graph, each one illustrating the stark contrast between promise and performance. The courtroom fell silent as the magnitude of the disparity became clear. Pierce tried to cross-examine aggressively. These numbers could be manipulated, interpreted differently. "These are audited financial statements," Victoria interrupted, calmly. "Prepared by independent accountants and verified by external regulators. The numbers don't lie, Mr. Pierce." As the afternoon wore on, the momentum shifted decisively in our favor. Even Judge Rawlings seemed impressed by the thoroughness of my grandfather's planning and the shadow board's meticulous documentation. The turning point came when Eleanor took the stand. At 75, she commanded the courtroom with quiet authority, her testimony carrying the weight of decades of corporate experience. "James Bradford was the sharpest mind I've ever encountered," she stated firmly. "Every decision was calculated, every contingency planned for. The shadow board wasn't created out of paranoia. It was created out of love for his company and concern for its future." She looked directly at my parents. He knew his son's limitations and his grandson's weaknesses, but he also saw his granddaughter's potential. Everything he did was to ensure Bradford Industries would survive and thrive. Pierce attempted to challenge her credibility. "Ms. Whitmore, isn't it true you were personally loyal to James Bradford? Perhaps too loyal to be objective?" Eleanor's eyes flashed. "My loyalty was to the company and its stakeholders. If that meant supporting structures that prevented its destruction through nepotism and incompetence, then yes, I was loyal to that cause. As the day concluded, Judge Rawlings announced she would review all evidence before ruling on the preliminary injunction. This case raises important questions about corporate governance and family business succession, she noted. My decision will be based solely on legal merits, not emotional appeals. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. My parents hurried past without comment, but Marcus couldn't resist a statement. "This isn't over," he declared to the cameras. "Bradford Industries belongs to the Bradford family, not shadow organizations." I chose not to respond publicly, following Thomas's advice to let our legal arguments speak for themselves. But as I walked away, I heard a reporter ask Marcus about the $47 million in losses. His stammered response revealed more than any prepared statement could. That evening, the shadow board gathered in my apartment for an informal debrief. The mood was cautiously optimistic, but Eleanor warned against premature celebration. "Your parents still have options," she cautioned. "They might try to rally minority shareholders or launch a public relations campaign." As if on cue, my phone lit up with news alerts. Marcus had given an exclusive interview to Business Chronicle, portraying himself as a visionary entrepreneur stifled by conservative thinking. The article mentioned the legal battle, spinning it as a clash between innovation and tradition. "Let him talk," Richard Chen advised. "Every public statement he makes can be fact-checked against financial records. He's digging his own grave." The next few days brought a media storm. Business publications picked up the story, and financial analysts began examining Bradford Industries' performance history. The narrative my parents had carefully constructed for years began to crumble under scrutiny. Employees started reaching out to me privately, expressing support and sharing their own experiences with Marcus's mismanagement. Department heads who had remained neutral began aligning with the shadow board's position, recognizing that their jobs and the company's future were at stake. On Thursday, an unexpected ally emerged. James Wilson, a respected board member who had initially supported my parents, requested a private meeting. We met in a quiet restaurant downtown, away from corporate offices and prying eyes. "I owe you an apology," he began without preamble. "I let personal friendship with your father cloud my judgment. The evidence presented in court was illuminating." He slid a folder across the table. "Internal polling of board members. If the judge rules in your favor, you'll have overwhelming support for formal leadership transition." This was crucial. Even if we won the legal battle, we needed board unity to move forward effectively. Wilson's defection signaled that my parents' support was eroding rapidly. Friday morning brought Judge Rawlings's ruling. The courtroom was packed with employees, shareholders, and media representatives. My parents sat rigidly, their expensive lawyers unable to mask their nervous tension. After careful review of all evidence, Judge Rawlings began, "I find that the shadow board structure created by James Bradford was legally sound and properly documented. The succession protocols he established are valid and binding." She continued for 20 minutes, systematically dismantling every argument my parents had presented. The shadow board's authority was upheld. The leadership transition protocols were validated. And most importantly, the evidence of my competence versus Marcus's failures was acknowledged as relevant to corporate governance. "The preliminary injunction sought by the plaintiffs is denied," she concluded. "The board of directors shall proceed with leadership evaluation as outlined in James Bradford's succession documents." The courtroom erupted. My parents sat in stunned silence as their lawyers hurriedly gathered papers. Marcus stormed out, followed by cameras and reporters. But the most significant reaction came from the employees in attendance, whose relieved applause spoke volumes about their fears under Marcus's potential leadership. Thomas turned to me with a rare smile. "Congratulations. The legal path is clear. But I knew this was just the beginning. The judge had validated the process, but the real work of leadership transition lay ahead. As we left the courthouse, Eleanor pulled me aside. "Your grandfather included one more safeguard," she said quietly. "A final test of leadership to be administered by the Shadow Board. It's not about legal authority anymore. It's about proving you can unite a divided company and lead it forward." I looked at the crowds dispersing from the courthouse, employees heading back to work, reporters filing stories, lawyers planning next moves. The company my grandfather built was at a crossroads, and I stood at its center. "What kind of test?" I asked. Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "One that will require every skill you've developed over the past decade. Are you ready?" As I watched my parents leave the courthouse, their dreams of dynasty shattered, I realized that victory in court was just the first step. The real challenge would be healing the wounds this battle had created and proving that merit, not birthright, was the true inheritance my grandfather had intended. "I've been preparing for this my entire life," I answered. "Let's begin." The golden child's reign had ended not with a dramatic fall, but with the quiet revelation of truth. Now came the harder task, building something better from the pieces left behind. The Monday following Judge Rawlings's ruling found me standing before the assembled Shadow Board in the original Bradford Industries factory, the same building where my grandfather had started the company 60 years ago. The space had been meticulously preserved, its brick walls and exposed beams a testament to our industrial heritage. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the morning air. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the eye, center of the group, holding a leather-bound folder that bore my grandfather's seal. The Shadow Board members formed a semicircle, their expressions solemn but supportive. This was no longer about legal battles or corporate maneuvers. This was about proving I could lead Bradford Industries into its next chapter. "Your grandfather designed this final test himself," Eleanor began, her voice carrying the weight of ceremony. "He called it the Crucible, a 3-part challenge that would demonstrate not just business acumen, but the character necessary to lead this company." She opened the folder, revealing 3 sealed envelopes, each marked with Roman numerals. "You will face these challenges over the next 30 days. Success will solidify your position as CEO. Failure. Well, your grandfather didn't believe in failure. He believed in learning." Victoria Kumar stepped forward. "The first challenge begins immediately. You'll find instructions in the envelope, along with constraints you must operate within. The Shadow Board will observe, but not interfere, unless absolutely necessary." I accepted the first envelope, its weight surprisingly heavy in my hands. Breaking the seal, I found a single sheet of paper with my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Challenge 1, the Forgotten Division. Bradford Technologies' semiconductor subsidiary has been losing money for 3 years. Your parents planned to sell it. Marcus wanted to shut it down. You have 14 days to find a third option that preserves jobs while returning the division to profitability. You may not spend more than $2 million in restructuring costs. My mind raced. Bradford Semiconductor employed 400 people in a small Michigan town where we were the largest employer. Closing it would devastate the community, but the financials were dire. We were losing $500,000 monthly. "When do I start?" I asked, already formulating potential strategies. "You already have," Eleanor replied with a slight smile. "The clock began ticking the moment you opened the envelope." The Shadow Board filed out, leaving me alone in the factory with Sarah, who had volunteered to assist during the challenges. As the door closed behind them, she turned to me with concern. "Bradford Semi is a mess," she said bluntly. "I've been monitoring their situation. Outdated equipment, demoralized workforce, and contracts with suppliers that are bleeding us dry." "Then that's where we start," I decided. "Book us on the first flight to Michigan. I want to see the operation firsthand. Within hours, we were airborne, reviewing years of financial data and operational reports. The picture that emerged was complex, but not hopeless. The division had once been highly profitable, producing specialized chips for industrial applications. But management had failed to adapt to changing market demands. The facility sat on the outskirts of Hartsville, Michigan, a town of $15,000 that had grown around our factory. As we drove through Main Street, I saw Bradford Semiconductor signs in shop windows, youth sports teams wearing our logo, and a community center bearing my grandfather's name. This wasn't just a business decision, it was about people's lives. Plant manager Tom Rodriguez met us at the entrance, his weathered face showing surprise at my unannounced visit. "Ms. Bradford, we weren't expecting corporate attention." "That's been the problem," I replied, shaking his hand. "Show me everything, Tom, starting with the production floor." The tour revealed what the reports had hidden: dedicated employees working with equipment 2 generations out of date, innovative workarounds to maintain production despite resource constraints, and a wealth of untapped expertise. These people hadn't failed the company. The company had failed them. In the break room, I held an impromptu town hall with the first shift workers. Their initial wariness gave way to cautious hope as I listened to their concerns and ideas. Many had suggestions for improvements but felt management never listened. "We could retool for automotive chips," suggested Maria Hernandez, a senior engineer. "Electric vehicles need exactly the kind of specialized semiconductors we use to excel at producing." "But that would require new equipment," another worker countered. "Corporate won't invest in a failing division." "Corporate is standing right here," I reminded them, "and I'm listening." Over the next 5 days, I immersed myself in every aspect of the operation. I worked alongside line operators, attended quality control meetings, and spent evenings reviewing proposals from the engineering team. A plan began to crystallize, not just to save the division, but to transform it. The key insight came from studying our old contracts. We still held patents for industrial-grade chips that newer manufacturers couldn't replicate. By focusing on this niche market and updating our production capabilities strategically, we could command premium prices. I called an emergency video conference with the Shadow Board on day 7. "I need approval to reallocate $1.8 million from the Corporate Innovation Fund," I announced. "Bradford Semi will pivot to producing specialized chips for industrial automation and electric vehicles." Richard Chen looked skeptical. "The market analysis?" I shared my screen, displaying detailed projections. 3 major automotive suppliers have already expressed interest. With targeted equipment upgrades and a focused product line, we project profitability within 6 months. The board deliberated briefly before approving my request, but the real challenge lay ahead: implementing changes while maintaining production and morale. Working with Tom and his team, we developed a phased transition plan. Instead of wholesale replacement, we would upgrade equipment strategically, retrain workers gradually, and maintain existing contracts while developing new ones. The workers responded with enthusiasm, energized by finally having investment and direction. On day 13, we signed our first new contract, a $10 million deal to supply specialized chips for industrial robots. The local newspaper ran the story on its front page: "Bradford Semiconductor secures major contract, saving local jobs." The next morning, I presented my results to the Shadow Board. The financial projections showed a path to $5 million in annual profits within 18 months. More importantly, we had preserved 400 jobs and revitalized a community. Eleanor nodded approvingly as she handed me the second envelope. "Your grandfather believed that true leadership means finding solutions that benefit all stakeholders. You've demonstrated that principle admirably." The second challenge proved even more complex. Challenge 2: the hostile takeover peregrine. Capital has quietly acquired 15% of Bradford Industries stock and is positioning for a hostile takeover. You have 10 days to prevent this without spending more than $10 million or diluting existing shareholder value. This was corporate warfare at its highest level. Peregrine Capital was known for breaking up companies and selling assets piecemeal. Their involvement suggested someone had leaked information about our family conflict, seeing vulnerability to exploit. I assembled a war room in the executive suite, bringing together experts in corporate defense, financial strategy, and shareholder relations. The first priority was understanding Peregrine's strategy and identifying potential allies. Sarah's research revealed troubling connections. Peregrine's CEO, David Merrick, has a history with Marcus. They were fraternity brothers at Harvard Business School. This might not be a coincidence. The implications were staggering. Had Marcus, bitter from his legal defeat, facilitated this attack on his own family's company? The possibility added personal betrayal to corporate threat. I spent 3 days analyzing Peregrine's previous takeovers, identifying patterns in their approach. They typically targeted companies with undervalued assets, internal conflicts, or aging leadership. We checked all 3 boxes in their eyes. My strategy emerged from an unexpected source, our Employee Stock Ownership Plan, ESOP. Years ago, I had championed a program allowing workers to acquire shares through payroll deductions. Combined with shares held by loyal institutional investors, we could create a blocking coalition. The next phase required delicate diplomacy. I personally called every major shareholder, explaining the situation and seeking support. Many were surprised to hear directly from a Bradford family member. My parents had always delegated such communications. "Ms. Bradford," said Jonathan Peters, manager of the largest pension fund holding our stock, "your transparency is refreshing. We've been concerned about leadership stability, but your recent actions suggest positive change." By day 7, I had secured pledges from shareholders controlling 45% of outstanding stock. Combined with family holdings and employee shares, we had effective control. But Peregrine wasn't finished. They launched a public relations campaign questioning our governance, highlighting the recent family conflict as evidence of dysfunction. Marcus gave interviews supporting their narrative, confirming my suspicions about his involvement. I countered with radical transparency. In an unprecedented move, I published a detailed report on Bradford Industries' performance over the past decade, highlighting the contrast between areas I had managed versus those under Marcus's control. The numbers spoke for themselves. The decisive moment came during an emergency board meeting on day 9. Peregrine had formally announced their takeover bid, offering a 20% premium over market price. Some board members wavered, tempted by the short-term gain. I stood before them, passion overriding my usual reserve. This isn't just about share price. It's about legacy, community, and the 15,000 people who depend on us. Peregrine will strip our assets and destroy everything my grandfather built. Then I revealed my masterstroke, a strategic partnership with Stirling Industrial Group, a company I had quietly negotiated with throughout the crisis. They would acquire a 10% stake at a 25% premium, providing capital for expansion while respecting our independence. The board voted unanimously to reject Peregrine's offer and approve the Stirling partnership. Within hours, Peregrine announced withdrawal of their bid, citing unfavorable market conditions. Eleanor's eyes shone with pride as she presented the final envelope. "Your grandfather always said that true leaders turn threats into opportunities. You've done exactly that." The third challenge was different. Challenge 3, the future vision. Present a comprehensive 5-year strategic plan for Bradford Industries that honors our heritage while positioning us for future growth. You have 7 days. The plan must address technology disruption, workforce development, and social responsibility. This wasn't about solving an immediate crisis, but defining a path forward. I retreated to my apartment, surrounding myself with market research, technology forecasts, and employee feedback collected over years. For 3 days, I worked almost without sleep, crafting a vision that balanced tradition with innovation. The plan centered on 3 pillars: digital transformation of our manufacturing processes, investment in sustainable technologies, and creation of an apprenticeship program to develop next-generation talent. But something was missing. The plan was solid but lacked the boldness my grandfather would have expected. On day 4, inspiration struck during a video call with Maria Hernandez from Bradford Semiconductor. "We're already adapting our chips for electric vehicles," she mentioned. "What if we went further, developed complete power management systems?" That night, I rewrote the entire plan, centering it on a bold pivot: transforming Bradford Industries from a traditional manufacturer into a technology-driven industrial solutions provider. We would leverage our manufacturing expertise to create smart factories, integrate AI into production processes, and develop proprietary technologies for emerging industries. The workforce development component became equally ambitious: a corporate university offering credentials in advanced manufacturing, partnerships with technical colleges, and a commitment to retraining workers displaced by automation. On the IEI 7th day, I presented my vision to the assembled shadow board, employees, and select media representatives. Using multimedia presentations, virtual reality demonstrations, and detailed financial projections, I painted a picture of Bradford Industries' future that was both inspiring and achievable. My grandfather built this company on the principle that American manufacturing could compete through innovation, I concluded. We will honor that legacy not by preserving the past, but by defining the future. The room erupted in applause. Even hardened board members seemed moved by the scope of the vision. Eleanor approached the podium, carrying a final sealed envelope. "There is one more item," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "A letter from James Bradford, to be read upon successful completion of the crucible." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and read aloud. "My dearest Rebecca, if you are reading this, you have proven what I always knew, that you possess not just the intelligence and skill to lead, but the heart and wisdom to lead well. Your parents' favoritism toward Marcus was their failing, not yours. I watched you grow, saw you develop the quiet strength that builds lasting success. Every challenge you faced, every obstacle you overcame, prepared you for this moment. Leadership is not about power or recognition. It's about service to employees, customers, communities, and the greater good. You have demonstrated understanding of this fundamental truth. I leave you not just a company, but a responsibility. Bradford Industries has always been more than a business. It's a testament to what dedication, integrity, and vision can achieve. Carry it forward with pride. Your loving grandfather, James." Tears flowed freely as I finished reading. The room remained silent, acknowledging the profound moment. Eleanor stepped forward, holding a ceremonial gavel. "By unanimous vote of the Board of Directors, I hereby appoint Rebecca Bradford as Chief Executive Officer of Bradford Industries, effective immediately." As applause filled the room, I thought of the journey that had brought me here. Years of working in shadows, of being overlooked and undervalued, of persevering despite discouragement. The golden child had fallen not through malice, but through truth revealed. And in that revelation, I had found not just my inheritance, but my purpose. Later that evening, as celebrations continued throughout the company, I stood alone in my new office, looking out over the city my grandfather had helped build. A soft knock interrupted my reflection. My mother stood in the doorway, her usual perfect composure replaced by uncertainty. "May I come in?" I nodded, and she entered slowly, taking in the office that had once been her husband's, her father-in-law's before that. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We were so focused on what we wanted Marcus to be, that we couldn't see who you already were. Why? I asked simply. Why was it always him? She sank into a chair, suddenly looking older. Your father needed to believe his son would surpass him. And I supported that narrative because it was easier than confronting the truth. We failed you, Rebecca, both as parents and as stewards of this company. Her admission, so long in coming, brought more sadness than satisfaction. What happens now? Your father is struggling to accept reality. Marcus is angry, but I think part of him is relieved. The pressure of expectations he could never meet was crushing him too. We talked for hours that night, the first honest conversation we'd had in years. While our relationship would never be what it might have been, understanding began to replace resentment. As dawn broke over the city, I returned to my desk, energized by the challenges ahead. The company my grandfather built was entering a new era, guided by the principles he had instilled and the vision I would bring. The inheritance I received wasn't just wealth or position. It was the opportunity to prove that merit, integrity, and quiet determination could triumph over privilege and pretense. The golden child's tarnished crown had been replaced by something far more valuable, the genuine respect of those I led and the knowledge that I had earned every bit of my success. My grandfather's final test hadn't just been about business acumen or leadership skills. It had been about character, about finding solutions that elevated everyone, about turning adversity into opportunity, about leading with both strength and compassion. As Bradford Industries' new CEO, I was ready to write the next chapter in our story, one that would make my grandfather proud and prove that true inheritance isn't what you're given, but what you earn. 6 months had passed since the dramatic transition of power at Bradford Industries, and the company had entered what the business press was calling its Renaissance period. From my office on the 40th floor, I watched the sun rise over a transformed corporate landscape. The changes we had implemented were already bearing fruit, but the real work of cultural transformation was just beginning. The first order of business had been establishing trust with employees who had grown cynical after years of mismanagement. I instituted weekly town halls, visiting each of our facilities personally to listen to concerns and share our vision for the future. The high contrast with Marcus's proposed slash-and-burn approach couldn't have been starker. People don't resist change, Eleanor had advised me during those early days. They resist being changed without understanding why. Taking this wisdom to heart, I made transparency the cornerstone of my leadership style. Every major decision was explained, every strategy was communicated clearly, and every voice was given the opportunity to be heard. The effect on morale was immediate and profound. One particular morning stood out in my memory. I had arrived at our Detroit manufacturing plant at 5 a.m. to meet with the night shift workers. These were the people Marcus had planned to lay off, viewing them as expendable numbers on a spreadsheet rather than skilled craftspeople with families and futures tied to our success. "Ms. Bradford," said James Wilson, a veteran machinist with 30 years of service, "we've heard a lot of CEOs make promises. What makes you different?" I looked him in the eye and replied, "Because I've been where you are. I've worked in the shadows, keeping this company afloat while others took credit. I know what it means to be overlooked and undervalued. That ends now." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Word of that meeting spread throughout the company, marking a turning point in employee relations. People began to believe that change was possible. Our financial performance reflected this cultural shift. Within 6 months, productivity had increased by 15%, quality defects had decreased by 30%, and employee retention had reached a 5-year high. The markets responded positively, with our stock price climbing steadily as analysts recognized the stability that competent leadership brought. But success brought its own challenges. As Bradford Industries regained its footing, competitors, who had been circling like vultures, now viewed us as a renewed threat. Industrial espionage attempts increased, and we faced aggressive poaching of our top talent. I addressed these challenges head-on, implementing robust security protocols while creating compelling reasons for our best people to stay. We launched an innovation incubator that allowed employees to develop their own projects with company support. We established a profit-sharing program that aligned everyone's interests with the company's success. The transformation wasn't limited to internal operations. Our approach to community engagement underwent a radical overhaul. Where Marcus had seen corporate social responsibility as an expensive publicity stunt, I recognized it as fundamental to our long-term success. In Hartsville, Michigan, where we had saved the semiconductor division, we partnered with local schools to create STEM education programs. In Detroit, we converted an abandoned warehouse into a state-of-the-art training center for advanced manufacturing skills. These initiatives weren't just good PR, they were investments in the communities that had sustained us through difficult times. One unexpected challenge came from within my own family. 3 months into my tenure, Marcus attempted a comeback of sorts, launching a competing venture with funding from mysterious overseas investors. The business press eagerly covered what they portrayed as a sibling rivalry, but I refused to take the bait. Let the results speak for themselves, I told our communications team. We're not in competition with shadows of the past. Marcus's venture collapsed within months, unable to secure necessary permits due to the questionable nature of his funding sources. I took no pleasure in his failure, recognizing that his downfall was largely the result of our parents' misguided favoritism that had denied him the opportunity to develop real business acumen. My relationship with my parents remained complex. My father struggled to accept the new reality, retreating into a bitter silence that spoke volumes about his inability to admit error. My mother, however, began a journey of self-reflection that led to tentative steps toward reconciliation. She appeared at my office one rainy afternoon, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. "I've been seeing a therapist," she admitted, settling into a chair across from my desk. Trying to understand why I participated in something so destructive to my own daughter. "And what have you learned?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That I was afraid," she said simply. "Afraid that if I acknowledged your competence, it would somehow diminish Marcus. Afraid that challenging your father's vision would fracture our marriage. I chose the path of least resistance, and it nearly destroyed everything." It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. While our relationship would never be what it might have been, her acknowledgement opened the door to a new understanding. She began volunteering with our community initiatives, finding purpose in giving back rather than maintaining social status. The Shadow Board, having fulfilled its primary purpose, evolved into an advisory council. These seasoned executives who had protected the company in secret now served openly, providing wisdom and perspective as we charted our course forward. Eleanor Whitmore officially came out of retirement to serve as chairman of the board, bringing her decades of experience to bear on strategic decisions. Our transformation caught the attention of business schools, with Harvard and Wharton developing case studies on our governance crisis and successful transition. I found myself speaking at conferences, sharing lessons learned about authentic leadership and the importance of merit-based succession planning. One speaking engagement stood out particularly. The International Women's Leadership Summit invited me to deliver the keynote address. Standing before an audience of accomplished women from around the world, I shared not just the story of corporate transformation, but the personal journey of finding my voice and claiming my worth. For years, I believed that working harder would eventually earn recognition, I told them. I thought that if I just saved one more division, solved one more crisis, the people who mattered would finally see my value. But I learned that sometimes you have to stop waiting for permission to lead and simply step into the role you've already been filling. The response was overwhelming. Women approached me afterward with their own stories of being overlooked, undervalued, and forced to prove themselves repeatedly in ways their male counterparts never had to. These conversations reinforced my commitment to creating more equitable pathways to leadership within Bradford Industries. We established a comprehensive mentorship program, pairing high-potential employees with senior executives. We implemented blind resume screening for promotions to eliminate unconscious bias. We created leadership development tracks that identified and nurtured talent regardless of background or connections. The results spoke for themselves. Within a year, the diversity of our leadership team had improved dramatically, and with it came fresh perspectives that drove innovation. Our product development cycle accelerated, and we began capturing market share in segments we had previously neglected. One of our most successful initiatives was the Bradford Innovation Challenge, an annual competition where employees at all levels could propose new products or process improvements. The winning ideas received funding and resources for development, with the innovators sharing in any resulting profits. The first winner was Maria Hernandez from our semiconductor division, whose proposal for biodegradable circuit boards addressed growing environmental concerns in electronics manufacturing. Her innovation not only opened new markets, but positioned Bradford Industries as a leader in sustainable technology. As the company flourished, I remained mindful of the principles that had guided my grandfather. In his personal papers, I found a document titled The Bradford Way, outlining the values he believed essential for long-term success: integrity, innovation, inclusion, and impact. These became the pillars of our corporate culture, displayed prominently in every facility and embedded in every decision-making process. The true test of our transformation came during an economic downturn in my second year as CEO. While competitors rushed to cut costs through layoffs, we took a different approach. Drawing on the financial reserves I had quietly built during my years of shadow leadership, we maintained employment levels while investing in research and development. This is when loyalty is earned, I explained to skeptical analysts. Our people stood by us through the crisis of leadership. We'll stand by them through economic challenges. The strategy paid off. When the economy recovered, Bradford Industries emerged stronger than ever, with a motivated workforce and a pipeline of innovations ready for market. Our competitors, having lost key talent during their cost-cutting measures, struggled to regain momentum. By the end of my second year, Bradford Industries had not only recovered from the turmoil of succession, but had set new records for profitability and market capitalization. More importantly, we had established ourselves as a model for responsible corporate citizenship and inclusive leadership. The culmination of this period came at our annual shareholders meeting. As I presented our results and vision for the future, I noticed my parents sitting in the back row. My father's expression remained unreadable, but my mother was beaming with pride. During the question and answer session, a longtime shareholder stood up. Ms. Bradford, 2 years ago, many of us doubted whether someone who had worked behind the scenes could effectively lead from the front. You've proven us wrong in spectacular fashion. What's the secret to your success? I paused, thinking of the journey that had brought me to this moment. There's no secret, I replied. Just the understanding that true leadership isn't about being in the spotlight. It's about illuminating the path for others. Everything I've accomplished has been possible because of the team around me and the values instilled by my grandfather. After the meeting, Eleanor approached with tears in her eyes. James would be so proud, she said, embracing me. You've not only saved his company, you've elevated it to heights he dreamed of but never achieved. That evening, I stood alone in my office, watching the city lights twinkle below. On my desk sat 3 items: my grandfather's letter, the first employee feedback form praising the new leadership, and a photo from the Innovation Challenge Awards ceremony. Each represented a different aspect of the journey from shadow to spotlight. A knock interrupted my reflection. Sarah entered, carrying a report that required my signature. As she placed it on my desk, she smiled. You know, when your grandfather recruited me all those years ago, he said something I'll never forget. He said, Watch Rebecca carefully. She doesn't know it yet, but she's going to change everything. I signed the report, thinking about the weight of expectations and the liberation of exceeding them. The inheritance I had received wasn't just a company or wealth. It was the opportunity to prove that quiet competence could triumph over loud mediocrity, that merit could overcome privilege, and that true leadership emerged not from entitlement but from earned respect. As I prepared to leave for the night, my phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. It was the first communication we'd had since his venture failed. Congratulations on the shareholder meeting. I finally understand what grandfather saw in you. I'm sorry it took me so long. I stared at the message, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The golden child had finally acknowledged reality, but the cost had been high for everyone involved. Still, his words represented a kind of closure, an end to the rivalry that had never been of my choosing. Driving home through the quiet streets, I reflected on how far we had come. Bradford Industries was no longer just surviving. It was thriving. More importantly, it was doing so with integrity, purpose, and a commitment to all stakeholders. The company my grandfather built had been saved not through legal maneuvering or power plays, but through the simple act of allowing competence to prevail over connection. The next morning brought new challenges and opportunities, as every day did. But now, instead of working in shadows to prevent disasters, I was leading from the front, building something greater than my grandfather could have imagined. The inheritance he had left me wasn't just a company. It was a chance to prove that doing things the right way, even when it was harder, ultimately led to the greatest success. As I walked through the lobby of Bradford Industries, employees greeted me with genuine warmth and respect. Not because I was a Bradford by birth, but because I had earned their trust through actions rather than words. The golden child's fall had made way for something far more valuable, a leader who understood that true inheritance wasn't what you were given, but what you built with what you earned. The future stretched before us, bright with possibility. And for the first time in my life, I faced it not as someone working in the shadows to save a legacy, but as someone creating a new one, built on merit, integrity, and the unwavering belief that the best inheritance of all is the opportunity to prove yourself worthy of trust. 3 years into my tenure as CEO of Bradford Industries, the company had not only stabilized, but was poised for unprecedented growth. The transformation we had achieved domestically caught the attention of international markets, and opportunities for global expansion began presenting themselves with increasing frequency. However, each opportunity brought its own challenges, testing both my leadership abilities and the resilience of the cultural changes we had implemented. The first major international opportunity arrived in the form of a potential partnership with Nakamura Heavy Industries, a Japanese manufacturing conglomerate. Their CEO, Hiroshi Nakamura, no relation to our legal counsel Thomas, had been following our turnaround story and saw potential synergies between our companies. The proposed collaboration would give us access to Asian markets while providing Nakamura with our innovative manufacturing technologies. I flew to Tokyo with a carefully selected team, including Victoria Kumar, whose understanding of Asian business culture proved invaluable. The contrast between Japanese corporate hierarchy and our newly implemented collaborative structure created interesting dynamics during negotiations. Bradford-san, Hiroshi Nakamura said during our first formal meeting, "Your reputation precedes you. We have studied your transformation of Bradford Industries with great interest. However, we must understand, how do you maintain authority while giving so much voice to your employees?" The question cut to the heart of cultural differences in leadership styles. I explained our philosophy carefully, drawing parallels to concepts of collective responsibility that resonated with Japanese business principles. Authority doesn't come from silencing voices, Nakamura-san. It comes from orchestrating them into harmony. When people feel heard and valued, they give their best effort, not because they must, but because they want to. the negotiations stretched over several months, during which I learned valuable lessons about international business. Unlike Marcus's rushed and ill-considered overseas ventures, we approached each decision methodically, respecting cultural nuances while maintaining our core values. Back home, the Shadow Board, now functioning as our Strategic Advisory Council, monitored these developments closely. Eleanor Whitmore, despite her advancing years, remained sharp as ever, offering crucial insights from her decades of experience. "Your grandfather always said that true growth comes from building bridges, not walls," she reminded me during one of our strategy sessions. But he also warned that every bridge must have strong foundations on both sides. Her wisdom proved prescient when we encountered our first major international crisis. A potential acquisition target in Germany, Rheinstahl Technologies, seemed perfect on paper. They possessed advanced robotics capabilities that would complement our manufacturing processes. However, during due diligence, Sarah uncovered troubling connections between Rheinstahl's parent company and the same questionable investors who had backed Marcus's failed venture. I called an emergency meeting of the executive team. The conference room fell silent as I laid out our findings. "We could proceed," I said, "and potentially gain significant technological advantages. Or we walk away, protecting our integrity, but possibly losing market opportunities to competitors less concerned with ethical considerations." The decision weighed heavily. Some board members argued for pragmatism, pointing out that the connection was indirect, and that passing up Rheinstahl could set us back years in robotics development. Richard Chen spoke up. "In the short term, this acquisition makes financial sense. But Rebecca, you've built something more valuable than quarterly profits. You've built trust. One questionable deal could undermine everything we've achieved." His words resonated. I remembered my grandfather's letter. Doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, was always the best path forward. We walked away from the Rheinstahl deal, a decision that initially drew criticism from market analysts. 6 months later, our decision was vindicated when Rheinstahl became embroiled in an international corruption scandal. Companies that had acquired their technology faced investigations and reputational damage. Meanwhile, our stock price surged as investors recognized the value of ethical leadership. The incident reinforced our commitment to principled growth, but it also highlighted the need for developing our own technological capabilities rather than relying solely on acquisitions. I initiated Project Phoenix, a massive R&D investment focused on next-generation manufacturing technologies. To fund this ambitious project without compromising our financial stability, we needed to optimize operations further. I turned to an unexpected source of inspiration: our own employees. The Bradford Innovation Challenge had been so successful domestically that we expanded it globally, creating an internal marketplace of ideas. The results exceeded all expectations. A team from our Brazilian office developed a supply chain optimization algorithm that saved millions annually. Engineers in our German facility created a predictive maintenance system that reduced equipment downtime by 40%. A cross-functional team spanning 3 continents designed a modular production system that revolutionized our flexibility in responding to market demands. These innovations not only funded Project Phoenix, but also positioned Bradford Industries as a leader in Industry 4.0 technologies. We began licensing our solutions to other manufacturers, creating a new revenue stream while helping modernize global industry. As our international presence grew, I faced personal challenges I hadn't anticipated: the constant travel, the weight of decisions affecting thousands of employees across multiple countries, and the relentless pace of global business took their toll. There were moments when I questioned whether I had the stamina to continue. During one particularly difficult period, when a labor dispute in our French facility coincided with regulatory challenges in China, I found myself working 20-hour days. Exhausted and overwhelmed, I retreated to my office, where I kept my grandfather's letters in a desk drawer. That night, I discovered a letter I hadn't read before, marked Open when the burden feels too heavy. Dear Rebecca, if you're reading this, you're facing the loneliest aspect of leadership, the moments when responsibility feels crushing and the path forward seems unclear. Remember that strength isn't about bearing weight alone. It's about knowing when to lean on others. You've surrounded yourself with capable people for a reason. Trust them. Delegate not just tasks, but true authority. Your role isn't to have all the answers, but to ask the right questions and empower others to find solutions. The company will face challenges that I cannot foresee, but I know your character. You will find a way forward, not by trying to control everything, but by inspiring others to give their best. Rest when you must. The company needs a leader, not a martyr. With love and confidence, grandfather. His words provided the perspective I needed. I restructured our executive team, creating regional leadership councils with genuine decision-making authority. This distributed leadership model not only relieved pressure on corporate headquarters, but also allowed for faster, more culturally appropriate responses to local challenges. The transformation paid dividends during our expansion into emerging markets. Unlike competitors who imposed rigid corporate structures, we adapted our model to local conditions while maintaining core values. In India, we partnered with local entrepreneurs to create micro-manufacturing hubs that provided employment in rural areas. In Africa, we invested in education initiatives that developed skilled workers while building long-term market presence. Our approach caught the attention of the United Nations Global Compact, which recognized Bradford Industries as a model for responsible international business expansion. I was invited to address the UN General Assembly on sustainable development through ethical business practices. Standing at the podium in New York, I reflected on the journey from working in shadows to speaking on the world stage. My message was simple but powerful. Business success and social responsibility weren't mutually exclusive, they were mutually reinforcing. True leadership, I told the assembly, isn't measured by the size of your market capitalization, but by the positive impact you have on communities you serve. Profit should be the result of creating value, not extracting it. The speech resonated globally, leading to partnerships with NGOs and government agencies. Bradford Industries became a preferred partner for development projects, opening doors to markets that valued our ethical approach. Not everyone appreciated our principles-driven strategy. Activist investors periodically pressured us to prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. During one contentious shareholder meeting, a hedge fund manager demanded to know why we were leaving money on the table by refusing certain lucrative but ethically questionable opportunities. I responded by sharing a story from our semiconductor division. 3 years ago, we had the option to relocate production to a country with lax environmental regulations. The savings would have been substantial. Instead, we invested in clean technology at our existing facility. Today, that decision has paid off through improved efficiency, employee loyalty, and contracts with environmentally conscious customers. Ethics isn't just about doing right. It's about doing well by doing right. The room erupted in applause, led by long-term shareholders who understood our vision. The hedge fund quietly divested shortly afterward, replaced by institutional investors aligned with our values. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.